Twins Malik and Maya shared an unbreakable bond growing up, but as adults, their lives couldn't be more different. Malik was a dedicated teacher, inspiring kids in his neighborhood, while Maya's life was marked by trouble, running with the wrong crowd, and chasing danger. When a young man was found murdered, all evidence pointed to Malik. His fingerprints, his DNA, even witnesses who swore they saw him. But Malik swore he was innocent, and his alibi seemed airtight. The truth, however, was darker than anyone imagined. A betrayal so chilling it would leave a community shattered and a family torn apart forever. Malik and Maya were twins born into a loving but struggling family in the heart of Atlanta. Growing up, their bond was inseparable, with Malik often protecting Maya from bullies and guiding her through their shared challenges. Yet, as they matured, their paths diverged. Malik became the shining star of the family, a teacher who was admired by parents and students alike for his dedication and passion. He believed in giving back to the community that had shaped him. Maya, on the other hand, seemed drawn to chaos. She associated with dangerous people, made reckless decisions, and lived life on the edge. Despite their differences, Malik never stopped trying to pull her back to safety, even when she pushed him away. One fateful night, a young man named Jamal Turner, known locally for his activism, was found brutally murdered in a parking lot. The news shook the community, and tensions rose as the police launched their investigation. Shockingly, all evidence began to point to Malik. His fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and a neighbor reported seeing a man who looked exactly like him fleeing the scene. Even more damning, Malik's DNA was discovered under Jamal's fingernails, evidence of a struggle. Malik was arrested, his protests of innocence falling on deaf ears. Maya watched in silence as her brother was paraded before the media, the weight of guilt and shame crushing her. She knew something Malik didn't, something that could unravel everything. Malik had always stood by her, but this time her secrets could destroy him. The twin bond that had once been their strength now became their curse. As Malik faced the fight of his life against evidence that seemed insurmountable, and Maya grappled with a truth too dangerous to confess. As Malik sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his mind raced with confusion and fear. He had spent the night of the murder at home grading papers, a fact he was certain he could prove. Yet the detectives across the table were relentless, presenting him with evidence that made no sense. His fingerprints on the murder weapon, his DNA under Jamal Turner's nails, it was like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Malik pleaded his case, explaining his alibi, but the officers only exchanged skeptical glances. They wanted a confession, and Malik could feel the pressure mounting. Meanwhile, Maya was drowning in guilt. She knew Malik was innocent, but the truth of what happened that night was a secret she had no idea how to reveal. She had spent the evening with a group of dangerous people, friends she knew Malik would never approve of. Among them was Marcus, her on-again, off-again boyfriend, who had a quick temper and a penchant for violence. Maya had witnessed an argument between Marcus and Jamal escalate to a deadly confrontation. She froze as Marcus lashed out, leaving Jamal lifeless on the pavement. Panicking, Maya helped Marcus cover up the crime, wiping down surfaces and ensuring no one could trace them, except for one glaring mistake. Maya hadn't realized Marcus had used Malik's jacket, left in her car earlier that day, to wipe the murder weapon. She hadn't thought about the stray hairs or fibers that might link Malik to the crime. As she watched the news coverage of Malik's arrest, her stomach twisted with dread. Her brother's life was on the line because of her choices. Maya wanted to tell the truth, but fear of Marcus's wrath and the shame of her betrayal kept her silent, even as Malik's world unraveled. Malik's trial began with a media frenzy, the courtroom packed with reporters and community members who once admired him, but now whispered doubts about his innocence. The prosecution painted a damning picture, portraying Malik as a man with a hidden dark side. They presented the forensic evidence, the fingerprints on the murder weapon, the DNA under Jamal Turner's nails, as irrefutable proof. Witnesses claimed they saw someone resembling Malik near the crime scene, and the narrative began to solidify. Malik's defense attorney, however, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, insisting Malik had no motive to harm Jamal. But the weight of the evidence and public perception seemed impossible to overcome. Maya sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, her guilt growing heavier with each passing day. She avoided Malik's gaze, fearing he would see the truth in her eyes. Every detail of the trial was a reminder of how her actions had spiraled out of control. She replayed that night over and over in her mind, haunted by the image of Marcus wielding the weapon, Jamal's pleas for help, and her own complicity in the cover-up. The fear of Marcus discovering her betrayal kept her paralyzed, even as Malik's future hung in the balance. As the trial progressed, Malik began to notice Maya's erratic behavior. She avoided family gatherings and barely spoke when she did appear. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, but he couldn't imagine what it might be. He clung to the hope that the truth would come out, but with each damning testimony, that hope dimmed. Maya felt the walls closing in. The guilt and fear consumed her, but the thought of confronting Marcus terrified her more. She was trapped, torn between saving her brother and protecting herself from the man who had already proven he could kill. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating as the trial neared its conclusion. The prosecution delivered their closing argument with conviction, hammering home the forensic evidence that seemed to seal Malik's fate. They highlighted the DNA, the fingerprints, and the supposed eyewitness accounts, leaving little room for doubt in the jury's mind. Malik's defense attorney fought back, pointing out the lack of motive and inconsistencies in the timeline, but it was clear the jury was struggling to see beyond the physical evidence. Malik sat silently, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair, knowing that his life now rested in the hands of 12 strangers. Maya's internal battle reached its breaking point. Each night, she was haunted by Malik's face, the brother who had always protected her, now fighting for his freedom because of her silence. She avoided Marcus as much as possible, but his presence loomed over her like a storm cloud. He had grown increasingly suspicious of her distant behavior, and Maya knew he wouldn't hesitate to hurt her if he sensed betrayal. Still, the guilt was unbearable. Every time she saw their mother's tear-streaked face in the courtroom or heard Malik's voice cracking as he maintained his innocence, she felt like she was being suffocated by her own cowardice. Late one night, Maya sat alone in her apartment, staring at the phone in her trembling hands. She wanted to call Malik's attorney to tell the truth, but fear rooted her in place. Marcus had warned her what would happen if she talked, and his threats echoed in her mind. But then she thought of Malik, locked away, his life unraveling because of her. With tears streaming down her face, she realized she couldn't stay silent any longer. She had to find a way to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The final day of Malik's trial was shrouded in tension, the air in the courtroom thick with anticipation. The jury was set to deliberate, and the outcome felt inevitable. Malik sat stoically, but inside, he was unraveling. He had pleaded his innocence repeatedly, but the evidence was too compelling. His defense team prepared him for the worst, yet a small part of him still clung to the hope that something or someone would save him. As the judge prepared to send the jury to deliberate, the courtroom doors creaked open, and Maya walked in. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her resolve was unshakable. Maya's sudden appearance caused a ripple of murmurs. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and asking to speak. The judge, after a brief deliberation, allowed it. As Maya took the stand, the room fell silent. Her voice quivered as she began to recount the events of the night. Jamal Turner was murdered. She admitted to being present at the scene and revealed how Marcus had committed the crime in a fit of rage. She explained how Marcus had used Malik's jacket to wipe the weapon, unknowingly implicating her brother. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to helping Marcus cover it up, paralyzed by fear of his retaliation. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Malik stared at Maya in disbelief, his heart a mix of relief and anger. The prosecution demanded time to verify her claims, while Marcus, who had been watching from the gallery, tried to flee but was immediately apprehended. Within hours, Maya's confession and corroborating evidence exonerated Malik, and Marcus was charged with Jamal's murder. While Malik was freed, the bond between the twins was irreparably damaged, leaving Maya to grapple with the weight of her choices and the family forever scarred by her betrayal. In the weeks following Malik's release, life didn't return to normal. The truth had come out, but the damage was done. Malik struggled to reintegrate into his community, where whispers and stares followed him everywhere. Though he had been exonerated, the shadow of the accusations lingered. His teaching career was over, his reputation tarnished by the ordeal. Malik tried to focus on rebuilding, but the betrayal by his own sister was a wound that wouldn't heal. Each time he saw Maya, he felt a mixture of gratitude and bitterness, unable to reconcile the sister he had once adored with the person who had almost destroyed him. Maya was living in her own personal hell. Marcus had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but his threats still echoed in her mind. She had lost the trust of her family, her community, and, most painfully, Malik. She tried to reach out to him, apologizing over and over, but her words felt hollow. Malik listened in silence, his eyes cold and distant, offering no forgiveness. The bond they once shared was shattered, replaced by a chasm too deep to cross. Maya decided to leave Atlanta, unable to face the constant reminders of her choices and the pain she had caused. Months later, Malik stood before a new group of students in a different city, determined to start over. He had found a teaching position where no one knew his story, allowing him a chance to rebuild. Yet, late at night, when the world was quiet, he often found himself replaying the events in his mind, wondering if he could ever truly let go of the past. As for Maya, she worked tirelessly to turn her life around, but she carried the weight of her guilt like a scar. The twins moved on in their separate lives, forever linked by a betrayal that neither time nor distance could erase.